This is Paul Carr for TechCrunch. I'm here with Andrew Losowsky, who's the new books editor at the Huffington Post. Andrew, congratulations on your new gig.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Now, we have a stray, just for some background, we've known each other for a while. Well, the Friday Project, which was a publishing house I used to be co-founder of, published one of your books. So you've taken a strange, so I met you you were in Barcelona when we first met. How did you end up at the Huffington Post?
That's a long and strange answer, I guess. You met me when I was living in Barcelona. I used to be the editorial director of a publishing company called Le Cool. We did different guidebooks, and as you say, the Friday Project published one of them in the UK. I then met a beautiful woman on an airplane. And
we've all done it, Andrew.
Well, this one I married.
Oh wow! Okay, we haven't all done that.
So that brought me over to the US, and I've been living in the US for a few years. And then somebody who works in the Huffington Post had been following the writing, editing, different things that I'd been doing. I was a freelancer for 10 years. And asked me to come in and sort of speak to some people about the job. My first day was Monday, so I've only been here a couple of days, but so far so good.
Well, that's I think my overarching point was you have quite a history in different aspects of publishing, from independent publishing and writing now to writing about books, and you've just written a Kindle single, which is called Reading in Four Dimensions, and I read it I guess over the weekend, and it's really interesting, but I think you're probably better to explain the general premise than I am. So what's the premise of the single?
Well, the premise is essentially that the way in which we are reading and understanding storytelling has been changing. Right now, we're at a point where people publish, but they don't think about it as publishing. Because when we send a tweet, we put something on a Facebook status, we update a blog, we might not think of it as publishing in the conventional sense. People still think publishing is something that is only done by huge companies that are able to get books into bookstores. Whereas, in fact, publishing is just creating something which is then out there for the public to see, the public part of the word publish, and that can't be changed. And that's really important. That if you think about it, you can only delete your Facebook status update. You can't go back and change it. And there's a reason for that, because publishing is setting a time, a date, a moment in which something exists that we can all refer to, we can go back and read, and so on. So conventionally, we've understood that as being a book, that it's printed, it's published, and that text will never change whenever we go back and look at the book. But now publishing has become something else. It's become something in a digital space about setting these timestamps, these moments, and saying, this is what I said at this moment. Now, what we're experiencing right now is where people are interacting with each other's stories all the time on digital media. Think about any of the news events, for example, what we were following, what was going on in Tahrir Square, on Facebook, on Twitter, on these different social media, each of us reading, retweeting, publishing ourselves, our thoughts, reacting to these things. And yet the books industry, curiously for something which is all about storytelling, is lagging a little bit behind. What we have right now in terms of digital books with devices like the Kindle and the Nook and the Sony e-reader are devices that put the text into a digital format and you download them via the internet, but they don't exist on the internet because they don't use any of these ways of understanding stories, of interacting with stories that people are doing. So what my text really is about is to try and explain in sort of layman's terms what this social reading is about, why it's important that it needs to come into the way we understand books, and the way that that's going to change the way that stories are written and also the way that stories are read.
So I think your initial point about the publishing is interesting because there is a sort of murky middle ground though still with this idea of when you publish something it's fixed in time. With blogging, which both of us now apparently do for a living, that's not always the case. The idea of putting up publishing a blog post, hitting the button which says publish on it, we can then go back and edit that and pretend that a previous version never happened. I mean, Facebook commendably doesn't allow you to do that. Twitter doesn't allow you to do that. But most bloggers don't seem to feel that what you put out there is the final version for discussion. And I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, discussions on the internet where an initial post will be there, people will be commenting on it, but then the initial post has changed to the point where the comments don't make any sense. And And is there a problem? Because one of the things I enjoyed very much about the single was it was almost a celebration of that idea of the published thing as object, as be it a book. And you mentioned the guy who printed out the entire Wikipedia entry for the Iraq War, which was fascinating, and how it evolved. It was this sort of huge Britannica-sized, shelf of books. But is there a risk with new technology that we don't anymore have a definitive text? Everything's just floating about, and none of us are discussing the same thing anymore. We're not discussing Great Expectations, we're discussing version 7 to 400 of a Wikipedia entry.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of different points that you've raised there. Firstly, the idea that a blog post can be changed or a web page can be changed, and as you say, the comments don't make any sense. This is something which now we're coming to a point where certainly reputable organizations, the company that we work for, if it's going to change a blog entry, if we change it, then we have to say what has been changed. And although you're right that the versions are not visible to the public, the versions still exist within the system. So it's like printing a book and then printing another copy of the book and changing it on the shelves, although obviously it's a lot easier. But the fact that the comments don't make any sense is why that is happening less and less. Plus, we're also at a point where Google Cache and these kinds of things are actually saving the previous versions as well, the moments that we published. So it's becoming harder and harder to actually hide the text if we decide we said something was terrible and now we realize we want to say it's good because we've received a lot of abuse or whatever it is. You can't get away with that kind of lying as easily anymore, though certainly some people do go ahead and do it.
So you go on. I was just thinking the other point you made in the single was a lot of people, particularly people who are very sort of digitally savvy, are sort of consider the book and the printed word to be a sort of dying, if not dead, format. And another, you seem to talk in the single about how in fact print has more longevity in many cases than digital. And I'm curious, and thinking back to your time at Le Cool and things, one of the nice things about the guidebook was it was a very visual and very tactile experience. Everything about it was designed to be held as a book, and there was an online version of it, but the book was the thing. Do you think that the book has a sort of big, exciting future? You talk in the single about the design of books and pop-up elements and all these different things you can do with print that you just can't really do online. Does the book have a healthy future ahead?
I think that books are only going to get better and better, but there are going to be fewer of them. The reason being that up until now, print in general has had a monopoly on the distribution of information other than the radio and the TV. So anything that you wanted to read, you had to get it via a printed piece of paper. That meant that print had to do everything. And actually radio and TV is an interesting example, because if you go back when there was radio and hardly anyone had a TV, then radio had to take all the responsibility for breaking news or describing anything that was happening. And then what happened was that TV didn't replace radio. What TV did was it created a place to put all of these incredibly visual stories. And radio was going, okay, so now we can focus on what our important things are, which is to provide an audio description, to provide commentary in places where people need radio, in situations in which they can't watch TV. So in the car, at the gym, these kinds of things. So it's very unusual for one medium to replace another completely. Sometimes it happens with formats like VHS if there is nothing to commend the existence of that format. However, with print, what we have is a format which has a physical presence in our lives. It doesn't change, and like you say, and that's something which now is actually a feature, not a bug, if you like, the fact that print doesn't change. So as you say, the stories, the web pages change all the time because the story changes, and that's fine. We don't want the BBC News page to remain static, and that's absolutely fine. We understand that we're part of a continuum. However, what by publishing something in print does is it creates a souvenir that can never be changed. It creates something that sits on your shelf and has the same experience every time you return to it. You will have that. And also what that means as a physical object is that that physical object travels with you in time, if you like. This is why I called the book Reading in 4 Dimensions, because it looks at the way that time and publishing changes our interaction with information. So in the case of a book, as we do with any object in our lives, picking it up will remind us of the time when we bought it. the time when we read it, the time when we took it with us, people we've shared it with, people who've borrowed it and given us it back. Maybe it has some crumbs from the cake you ate a couple of years ago inside the pages. But all of these things mean that it as an object is aging with us. And so by picking it up, we kind of, with our imaginations, we kind of treat it like a time machine.
Well, there's something even deeper than that, because everything you've just said is about, you know, my copy of a book, and I remember this. But you mentioned in the single an experiment you did in front of a group of people involving a book which none of them had any interest, I mean, potentially no interest in, certainly had no history with. I don't know if you can sort of share that briefly.
Yeah, certainly. It was very simple. I was giving a talk about these sorts of ideas, and I bought a terrible book about the holistic side of 1930s childbirth at a second-hand bookstore.
The author might be still alive, and they're watching this going, I worked really hard on that book about holistic childbirth. That saved lives.
He's not still alive.
Okay, fine. Then
published about 70 years ago.
Then screw his book.
And it was terrible, and it cost me $1. And I said, listen, this is a terrible book, and you know, who here wants to read it? And no one put their hand up. I said, fine, so can I just tear some pages out? Can I just tear it up? It's a useless object. And so there was a vote. I asked for a vote in the audience of who would let me tear up this book. And 85, 90% of the people said, no, don't tear it up. And I said, well, why not? You know, it has no value. I said, no, but it's the principle. It's the idea of destroying this knowledge that can never return once you've destroyed it. That book can never be shared. Like, well, you don't want to share it. It's terrible. But yet, you know, one member of the audience came up and took it off me and didn't trust me not to destroy it later, I think. We still have this legacy affection with the book. It still has a great deal of power. It almost symbolizes knowledge.
Well, the destruction of books has a huge the idea that somebody would tear up a book or burn a book is the ultimate example. Like, there is definitely something. You have talked about how if that were just a blog post, people probably wouldn't care if you deleted it. Is there a concern that by not really considering data and text on a screen to be as valuable, that it actually almost makes it easier to sort of censor information and destroy it? Like, if we don't even want to tear up a book about holistic childbirth, then I feel like books are pretty safe. But if we don't feel the same way about data, should we be just like printing everything out in order to safeguard it for the future? Or is that like a weird retrograde step?
It's an interesting question. I guess the question is always who has the authority to decide what is saved and what isn't, and who has the authority to say something cannot be deleted or can be. I understand what you're saying about the dangers of censorship with data, that it's a lot easier to delete things, but then it's also a lot easier to copy things. It's also a lot easier to safeguard things. It's a lot easier to distribute things, even if the official the official line is that it should not be distributed. So I think with digital information, it's a lot safer for that reason, actually, rather than the dangers that you cite.
Well, I mean, the Kindle is fascinating. I mean, how you've managed to pack so many different points for discussion into a Kindle single, it's incredible. You should have just spread it out over to as many volumes as the Iraq War Inquiry, and there'd still be more to talk about. It's 99 cents. It's cheaper than a book on holistic childbirth written in the 1930s, and easier to get hold of, and harder to destroy. So, and available on the Amazon, on the Kindle store, right?
That's right.
Reading in 4 dimensions. Andrew Losowsky, thank you very much, and good luck with the new gig.
Thanks so much, Paul.